Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
3rd Street Cafe had a motto, "This is the place where friends meet." And back 50 years ago, there were not very many restaurants in town, so we were always very, very busy. My folks, Hans and Louise Marks, owned and ran 3rd Street Cafe for a number of years. My dad was a chef, trained in Germany, and he met my mom at the Pfister Hotel in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Initially, they did not get along really well, but later on they got together and got married.
Hans and Louise Marks were absolutely wonderful people. They were so good to me. I'm Cleo Schwartz. I started at 3rd Street in 1949. And the thing I remember the most about it is it was a half a block long, so you had a long ways to carry your food up to the front of the restaurant.
My name is Norma Lundin, and being I really like to eat, I remember some of the terrific food they had, and I learned a new language when I went there. We served graveyard stew, which was milk toast, and that was a takeoff for oyster stew because oysters were kind of expensive, but toast wasn't. Then we served corned beef hash with a poached egg right in the middle of it. I'd never heard of that before. And we had, every Sunday, we had turkey or chicken. And the thing I liked best about that was the dressing. Hans made dressing that nobody has ever duplicated. It was just wonderful. Well, I know that I gained 10 pounds that winter I worked there because we were allowed to eat one meal a day when we worked a full 8-hour shift. And that was such a treat because coming from a small town, I didn't have the experience of eating in restaurants, let alone working in one. And I started out as a dishwasher, and Louise come to me and she says, "Norma, I don't want to hide you in the kitchen anymore. You go out and learn to be a waitress." I said, "Oh, but I'm scared. Hans will holler at me." "No," she says, "I'll tell Hans not to holler at you." Well, from that time on, when Hans was going to correct me, he would point his finger. He'd say, "You." Okay, okay. I'd sneak out front as fast as I could go and do my work, you know. And even in those days, I don't think I heard too good because somebody would poke me and say, "Hey, you're wanted in the kitchen." Okay, I'd run back there. And Martha Quirm used to call me Yogi Bear because she said I had such short, fat little feet to run back and forth between there and the customer.
Hans was the best chef. He always had the stock pot on the back of the stove for every day he had a different soup. And they were different soups. He'd make pepper pot soup. He'd make the New England clam chowder that was absolutely the best. Every day was a different menu and different specials. And I think when I started there, I think I started out at 25 or 35 cents an hour. And I too worked the split shift because I lived downtown. It was easy for me to come in and work the 2 hours at noon and then come back at 5 and work till closing.
I worked at the 3rd Street Cafe in 1948 until sometime in the latter part of 1950. My fondest memories are of working with Shirley when she was just a barely teenager. I loved her mother and father. They were very good to me. And customers like the Gill family, the Cahill family, people that worked at the bank were there every afternoon for coffee.
We had to learn to call our orders in. We'd come to the kitchen and there was a certain protocol. If we had fried chicken, we had to say that first. Roast beef, and that was kind of irrelevant to Hans because he could just dish that up. But food that he had to cook, we had to say 2 chicken dinners, 3 roast beef dinners, and then if we forgot and added a veal steak, then he'd point his finger and correct us. I wasn't right. I had to say chicken, veal steak, and then the roast beef. He says, I don't care about the roast beef. You tell me that when you pick it up. And the thing I remember most is everything was in our head. That made us more speedy because we didn't have to stop and write anything down. Well, then years later, when the cooks wanted to write everything written down, I couldn't even scratch out an order they could understand. So I'd have to work a week or so before they'd read my writing because we were so used to everything was in our head. We picked our order up, it was in the order we called it in, and nothing ever written down. And this is something that Hans explained came from France years ago. He says, you have to write it, you'd never be a good waitress. So we would go, I think maybe it was about 10 people at a table. We could remember their orders completely from start to finish. And after 10 people, we get another waitress to the other side of the tables because they could remember about that many. Right. Yeah, and it really was fun. It was more fun than work after I got over being afraid of Hans.
At 11 o'clock, the noon rush would start, and it'd be like packed. People waiting in the aisles, and you trying to carry your, and we all called in our orders. Nothing was written down, and Hans would remember. And there would be like, what, 6 or 8 waitresses at noon? 8 waitresses at noon.
I was fresh off the farm and never worked before. I worked at Rex Cafe for 2 weeks. And the hostess at Third Street Cafe, Millie, and I don't know her last name.
Halverson.
I roomed at their house, and she said, well, come to 3rd Street, they'll hire you. So, and I was hired in the kitchen as a dishwasher and worked there until one day Hans told me, you're going to be a waitress. And I said, no, I'm not. And he says, yes, you are. And they got me a uniform and stuck me out there. Very shy and couldn't talk to people. My husband said it was the best thing that ever happened because you learned how to talk to people.
There was one waiter, very, very good. We collided in the aisle one time with we each had about 10 coffee cups. So we were soaked with coffee. They were all mainly regular customers that were there day in and day out. So they were all acquainted, and they would have a chance on their breaks to visit a little bit and relax.
Well, you went up to the table and you greeted the people. You served water first. That was your first thing. And then when they ordered their meal, then you had to take their choice of soup or juice and salad. We had to serve the soup or the juice first. And when they're done with the soup, we had to take that away and serve the salad. When they're done with the salad, we removed those plates and brought the entree. And then dessert was always extra in those days for like pie or that. And we were always instructed to offer them pie because that made more money. And profit was the name of it, you know. And so by the time you were done, you served many, many courses. And when they received their dessert, you never used a tray. Everything was on your arms. As you were asking their desserts, you were loading your arm with their dirty dishes. Then you'd go by the dishwasher station and you'd kind of tip it, and then they'd all come off and you'd go and pick up orders from the cook. And it was all about coordination.
Everyone was wearing uniforms, and everybody had to be neat. Everyone had to wear a hairnet. And I guess that was the thing that impressed me the most working there.
They were pink and kind of like a polyester, not polyester, I don't know, nylon or something.
Nylon. After the yellow ones, they were nylon.
And what was really neat is you washed them and they were never wrinkled.
One thing, we had the yellow cotton uniforms, so we all took prestige in having the best starched, ironed uniform, and everybody did look really nice.
All the food was made fresh. Nothing came in canned or frozen. My dad made his own dressing for salads and his own shrimp sauce.
Cut his own meat.
He cut his own meat. He bought the whole cow and cut it up. We got fish that came in on ice, but they needed cleaning, and that was one of my horrible jobs, to clean fish. And the chickens came in on ice, but they were already gutted out. What else? We had to peel potatoes. We had a potato peeler. That was really a big deal to have a potato peeler. And then we had it.
Huge.
Yeah. And then in those days, there were no ice machines. We got blocks of ice out of Lake Bemidji and shipped out for our Coca-Colas and our water. If somebody wanted ice in their water, that was Lake Bemidji water.
Pure.
Yeah, it was pure water. And I don't think anybody ever got sick, did they?
No. Well, it was always clear.
Third Street was the place to go. The Markham was the bus stop, and they got a lot of the hotel people and stuff like that. Influential people, the Gills in particular, I waited on them every evening. I can almost tell you what they had to eat. Mama Gill had liver and onions fried in butter. And Papa, I don't remember what he had.
Prime rib.
Was it prime rib? Yeah, it was usually their favorite, and they always left me a dime.
Third Street Cafe was located at 209 3rd Street, where Wells Fargo is now located. The part of Wells Fargo that has a glass roof, and there were about 10 rooms upstairs that were rented out to the waitresses for $5 a week.
Well, I think part of it was the elegance of the cafe with the tablecloths and the professionalism of what they taught us on how to serve the food and present it way back then. They do a good job in some places nowadays, but it's not a polished thing.
I remember the kitchen staff. I had lots of fun with Bertha. Always called her, Marcia. Martha, and I always called her Marcia. And she spoiled me in the kitchen. She gave me little tidbits. And I worked a split shift most of the time. Worked over the noon hour, then had a few hours off, came back, and I'm not sure just what time I came back, but it was for the supper hour, and then I worked till close at midnight.
And it was open that late. Were they busy?
And I hated basketball season because we got so busy, and all these kids ordered malts and tried to get, we had like 4 things, and try to get all the malts made for everybody was a nightmare. When you walked into the cafe, you had booths that was all along the one wall. And the booths were big enough 6 people could sit in it comfortably. And then they had a section of booths for 2. I can't remember how many, must be 5 of them that went down the center, and then there was 2 counters. And when I first started waitressing, that's where they put me, was on the counter. And the most fun was at lunch when the railroad guys came in.
How so?
They teased me a lot. I'll never forget the day that I went by and knocked all their hats off. And I was so surprised because they were all bald and they all got mad.
The pastry cook would come to work about 3:30 in the morning, and she was absolutely the best. She every day would make like 30 pies, 6 cakes, breakfast rolls, just to die for. They were so good. And we served a steak sandwich $1.25, and you get this nice, about a 6-ounce steak with a salad and toast and French fries.
When I came home from school in the summertime and Christmas vacation, I would work in the restaurant. And most times I would have to open it at 6 o'clock in the morning. Breakfast was a difficult shift because we had to cut grapefruit and squeeze fresh orange juice. We used to have big boxes of orange juice, and we had to squeeze orange juice every time we had an order.
Hans and Louise Marks were absolutely wonderful people. They were so good to me, and they treated everyone like family. And that's what Louise would always tell us, work together as a family. And that brought us all very close. A bunch of us are lifelong friends.
One thing I really remember, my mom was really good to her waitresses. Many times they were poor. A lot of times there was food left over that she would send home. And I think probably every night soup went home with somebody. So anyway, they were very good people, and they took care of their employees, and they really liked their customers and wanted to serve them.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.